Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to him. And the Pharisees and scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." And then Jesus said, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me.' So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, 'How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I'll get up and go to my father, and I'll say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. While he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to his father, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, put it on him, put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Get the fatted calf and kill it, and let's eat and celebrate. For the son of mine was dead and is alive. He was lost, and he is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field. When he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he got him back safe and sound.' Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, 'Listen, for all these years I've been working like a slave for you. I've never disobeyed your command, yet you've never given me even a young goat, so I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him.' And the father said to him, 'Son, you are always with me. All that is mine is yours.' But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost, now is found." The grass withers and the flower fades, but the word of the Lord lives forever. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. If you can't tell, I do love dogs. Talked a little bit last week about my dogs and talked about them quite a bit before. But this morning is about a dog we had growing up. Her name was Belle. She was a Great Pyrenees, kind of similar to the one in the picture. Now the dogs we have now, by nature, they just want to follow us around everywhere and would never even think about running off unless they see a squirrel or something like that to chase. But Belle was different. The Great Pyrenees breed comes from the Pyrenees Mountains. Being a mountain dog, by nature, they want to wander. Belle figured out how to climb over the fence in the backyard and wander off whenever she wanted to. And she'd always come back after a while. She just wanted to go wander around the neighborhood. Now, we didn't walk her enough like we should have, so some of you might be thinking of that. That definitely would have helped. But even so, we don't walk the dogs we have now enough, but they still have no desire to wander off without us. But Belle did. I remember at first when we'd go out to look for, once, maybe the first time, we saw her just kind of grazing in between the houses, hanging out, minding her own business, just sniffing around, and just between a couple houses down the street. Now, we got out, called to her. She came trotting right over. I remember scolding her, saying, "Bad dog," and all that. Over her running away is what I was scolding her about. Though I thought that was the right reaction at the time. But then, at a later time when she'd wandered away and we went to find her, same thing, got out and called to her. She stopped trotting over when we called to her. She didn't want to come trotting over anymore. Never really understood what that change was all about. Now, all that cleared up for me when we took our current dogs to dog training in recent years. There's a good reason that they say the dog training is really about training the owners and not as much the dogs. The trainer explained that when your dogs do something wrong and then some time passes, you should never call them over to you and then scold them for what they did earlier. It's confusing, and they think that you've just scolded them for what they just did, which was come over to you. With Belle, that's exactly what I did wrong. When we found her, I called her over and scolded her right after she came to me. It makes perfect sense now. I didn't at the time, but I should have praised her. I should have hugged her. I should have kissed her for coming over to me when I called. I mean, that's what I really wanted, for her to come back. I wanted her to be home with us, where I knew she was safe and sound, I knew she was cared for. And I also should have been more understanding about why she wandered off in the first place. That's part of who she was. It was in her blood. She's a mountain dog. She had a natural desire to wander. Okay, now I know I keep comparing us to dogs. Please excuse me for that. From early in Genesis, we know we have dominion over the animals. We're more developed, more advanced, more sophisticated, on top of the food chain and all that stuff. Nevertheless, I do see some commonalities. Let's say a kid runs away from home. What's the most common reason for that kid not to return home? Kid doesn't want to face being in trouble, to face the consequences, to have their freedom restricted even more, to come home to an unhappy and uncomfortable situation, whatever that may be. Now, of course, expecting that kind of response is going to make the kid resist coming back home. And it's not just kids. Let's say one of us adults does something wrong to someone close to us, a spouse, a friend, a family member, someone who loves us. I bet we can all think of a time when we messed up and didn't want to face the person who we hurt. There's a reason it takes guts to face the music. It's hard to own up to what we've done wrong, and then also to deal with the consequences. Whether it be a scolding or even just the hurt that we caused that person. It's hard to face it. It hurts. Of course, that's a big difference between us and the dogs. A little time passing doesn't make it so confusing for us. We still know what we're being scolded for. You all know this prodigal son story well enough to see the connections, I think. The question is about welcoming and eating with sinners. Jesus tells a story of a man who had two sons. Younger wanted all of his inheritance, in essence saying to his father, as Paula described, in essence saying, "You're dead to me. Just give me what's mine and I'm out." His father gave it to him. The younger son left, blew it all in dissolute living. Lived like he was in Vegas until he was flat broke. Now, we don't get many details. It does mention prostitutes, but it doesn't mention anything else. But, I guess what happens in Vegas really does stay in Vegas, at least in this case. What was bad for him got worse. Flat broke, And then a famine takes place. Nothing to provide for himself. And he clearly couldn't rely on charity because everyone around was scraping just to survive. He managed to get a job feeding pigs, but it wasn't enough. He was still struggling. He was still going hungry. That's what it took for him to come to his senses, to muster up the guts, to realize, I should just go home. What's wrong with me? My father's workers have enough to eat and then some, while I'm sitting here starving. I'm going to go home. I'm going to own up to what I've done. I'm going to ask him for a job. Now, I hurt him. I blew all the money and property he gave me. I'm not even worthy to be called his son anymore. He'll never take me back in. But surely, he'll give me a job, let me work for him. So the younger son went home, told his father exactly what he planned to say. Well, at least the first half of it. He got in the part about sinning against heaven and before his father and not being worthy to be called his son. But that's where his father interrupted him with great joy. To the son's surprise, the father had a servant get a robe and a ring and sandals and put it on him and then prepare the fatted calf, and the celebration began. The father simply couldn't contain his joy. So excited to have his son back home. So excited that his son wanted to be back home. "This son of mine was dead and is alive again," his father exclaimed. And the older son wasn't happy. Not at all. Started complaining right away. He's upset. He feels slighted. He's been good. He didn't do what his brother did. He's been very faithful throughout his life. He's quick to let his dad know how he feels about it. To which his father responds, "Son, you're always with me. All that's mine is yours." We had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and he has come to life. He was lost, now he's found. Clearly in this story, the father is God. The younger son is any sinner. The older son is any righteous and faithful person. It's a story of comfort to the sinner, that you can turn back to the Lord without consequence. You won't be scolded or treated harshly in any way for the wrongs that you've done. God wants nothing more than for you to come home. And it's a story of caution for the faithful who might very well feel slighted over the sinner being welcomed with such joy, welcomed so warmly. It's a lesson for all of us to soak in. When talking to Paula about the service for this morning, she called this story the best passage ever. A lot of us probably have similar feelings about it. Such a powerful lesson. It teaches us that what really matters is the bigger picture. Some of us, we have a natural desire to wander. And the farther we wander, the harder it is to turn back. We feel like we've gone too far, been gone too long, done too much, can't possibly face the Lord after all that. But God says, it's okay. All I really want is for you to come back home. Some of us are naturally more faithful and would just as soon follow the Lord around everywhere. Those of us like that may not want the sinner to get such a warm welcome, feeling deserving of a greater reward for being faithful throughout the long haul. God says, no. I rejoice that you have been so faithful. And all I really wanted was for all of you to be faithful and for all of you to be back home with me. God even sent Jesus to make that happen. Pretty intense gift. Just like I needed as a dog owner, sometimes we all need a little training. Thankfully, the scriptures are there for us, give us some guidance along the way, to remind us who God is and to teach us about God, teach us who we're supposed to be. Whichever part of this story you identify with, may we each learn to see the bigger picture. May we be fully aware that we can turn back to the Lord at any time and be received joyfully with open arms. And may we share in God's joy each time a sinner comes home. Amen.